Yeah. So I will go a little bit more into introversion and extroversion later. So right now, I believe most people's idea of an introvert and an extrovert is more of an introvert is someone who's so most people have this notion that an introvert is someone who's quiet, who doesn't talk much, or who's maybe shy in social environment, whereas an extrovert is the opposite. They easily open up to people, they easily speak, they are loud and things like that. So that's all those are valid. But as for why they are valid, yeah, that can be explained through whether an extrovert is a gatherer, or something else. The something else, the answer lies in deciding, which I'm going to go into. So opinion, earlier Joe mentioned something about someone who decides, so they do not need to worry so much about whether it's an opinion that's formed by everyone or by most people. So that's basically deciding based on self-opinion. Whereas the opposite end of the spectrum of self-opinion is in fact tribe opinion. Or this tribe, it can simply mean a community. Yeah, extrovert recharges with other people and introvert recharges alone. Yeah, that's valid also. In fact, that is a sign of self versus tribe. So in fact, between self and tribe, okay, instead of getting you to think about who is the introvert and who is the extrovert, I shall reveal to you the answer over here. So someone who's self above tribe is an introvert, and someone who's tribe above self is an extrovert. So really, you can see over here that an introvert, someone may be an introvert who's self above tribe, but can still be an extrovert, being a gatherer above organizer. So it's possible for someone to recharge on their own, but yet they are a gatherer and they go out, just gather stuff and get things before sorting things out. It's also possible for someone to be an introvert because he organizes more than he gathers, but at the same time, he's particular about what's the collective opinion that everyone has. So he prefers to form an opinion that's in line with everyone in the team, or even in line with at least 70 or 80% of this team. Does that make sense to everyone? So to give you a little bit more depth about introversion or extroversion. So if you look at introversion, it's sort of like a flask that is deep and narrow and is filled up with water. Whereas extroversion, so introversion is represented by something like this, and extroversion is represented by something like this. So there are actually advantages and disadvantages on both sides. Of course, the key is to be able to merge both of them, and that's what coherence is all about. With coherence, you are getting the best of both worlds. Introvert is, the downside to that is they are pretty narrow when it comes to what are some of the things that they are looking out for. Their scope of interest is restricted to just these few things, or maybe just this one thing even for extreme cases. But they are very deep and they go very in-depth into that few topic of interest. Whereas an extrovert is someone who's more scattered, so they have a wider broad of interest, but the downside to that is they are also more shallow, not going in depth in any of it. And of course, both introverts and extroverts have got characteristics from both sides, of course. Then the goal is to achieve coherence to get this. So this introvert and extrovert, if someone is self versus tribe. So an introvert, the downside of that can be he's very self-contained, in whatever he has in mind or whatever viewpoint he has. Maybe it's a very strong viewpoint, but he can go very deep into it to justify why that's the case. Whereas someone who's tribe above self, he's someone who wants to integrate everybody's viewpoint, but this guy may not have much depth into justifying whatever viewpoint that he took up, because all these viewpoints are not his own viewpoint. He didn't think through them deeply, about what caused him to come up with these conclusions. All these are simply things that's instilled upon him. So it can include things like propaganda, or culture of something. This happens when someone blindly follows certain culture or certain norms. This is an example of tribal self for introversion and extroversion. Yeah. But how about organize and gather? Someone who's organized has got a clear structure in mind. So they like this structure so much. If anything that they were to handle falls within this structure they have in mind, they will be so comfortable and they are very quick at getting things done. When it comes to all these things, it may not be speed. Sometimes it's their ability to go in depth to get something done really well. Whereas someone who's gathered above organized and extrovert, he's capable of doing new things and picking up things very fast. Just like that, it's very, very easy for him to get started on something new. But to go in depth into it and to have clear structure is something that he needs a bit more work on. So that's the main difference between introvert and extrovert on both spectrum, the observing spectrum and the deciding spectrum. So at this point in time, is everyone still with me? So in that case, I guess the last 10 minutes, I would like you to think about what are if it's for you yourself, are you an extrovert or an introvert on either spectrum based on whatever that I just shared with you? Can you comment in the chat box?
Bingsley, could this be two? Let's say the 3 areas of your life: health, relationships, career. Could there be a difference in each one of those areas?
Yes, it is. It could be. So different aspects of life, we are taught to do things differently. So for example, someone may be self above tribe when it comes to personal life, for example. But when it comes to career, when it comes to business, they are the opposite. It's actually quite common for that, especially for people who are high flyers, for people who are high performers. Because what happens is if someone is an extreme self-above tribe for general aspects of their life, but they work really hard and they want to do really well in, let's say lifting, for example, or maybe not lifting, let's say in business, for example. Yes, it is possible to be introvert on both spectrum. Yeah. So back to Joe's question. So for this guy to do very well in business, he probably realized that he has to emphasize on what he tend to neglect. So, and him having the internal drive, having the motivation to emphasize more on tribe rather than self-opinion, it can also stem from wanting something that he can be proud of. So it's still somehow tied down to his self-identity. So in that case, there's actually a bit of a coherence over here. But the question should be, which one resonates well and best with you on the general aspect? So if let's say you find it hard to answer it, which is often the case if you are doing well, or if you went through some form of growth journey, it may not be easy to answer. But from a general point of view, would you consider yourself an introvert or extrovert on either spectrum?
Introvert, both, I believe.
Yeah, sorry, Joe, you were saying?
Introvert. Yeah. In organized and self-introvert.
I see. Okay, cool. And how about the rest? You have any idea?